Even if you're not familiar with the traditional system of the tarot, if you're familiar with my channel, you might recognize these exact cards, because recently I did a video on Neptune in the sign of Aries, which is represented by the Hanged Man and the Emperor in the major arcana. Now, why am I bringing up these cards again? Well, we have a very significant transit coming up shortly. Neptune is about to be joined in Aries by player 2, who is going to be none other than Saturn, represented by the World card in the tarot. Now, what does all of this even mean for us on the mundane level? Glad you asked, because that's what I'm here for. Hey there, I'm Howie, and if you're new here, then that makes two of us, because so am I. And I promise you I will eventually change this intro once I finally feel comfortable enough with this whole YouTube thing. I am a chronic non-reader of horror fiction, I am a professional reader of tarot and astrology, and I'm also a planning enthusiast. And in today's video, we are going to be having another astrology chit-chat, and we are going to be focusing on these big transits between Saturn and Neptune. First and foremost, we are going to see Saturn moving into the sign of Aries just in time for Valentine's Day, February 14th. And shortly after that, on February 20th, he will be conjoining Neptune at 0 degrees of Aries, the initiating degree of the initiating sign of the zodiac, for an extended conversation, given how slowly both of these planets move. So, once again, what does it all mean? Let's dive in and take a closer look at what's going on in the sky. Anytime we want to delineate the planets and try to interpret the messages that they are reflecting, we need to start at the beginning. And there is no better place to start at the beginning than with the beginning of the zodiac, which is, in this case, the sign of Aries. This sign is the fire cardinal sign of the zodiac, and it is the temple of both the planet Mars as its domicile ruler and the sun as its exaltation ruler. And between the two of them, you've heard me say this before, we have Aries representing bravery and courage, rage and anger, passion and high spirits. There's vitality, there's energy, there is life in Aries. The sign of Aries marks the spring equinox, which is the beginning of the new zodiacal year. It's springtime. This is when life is ready to return to planet Earth. This is when the Earth starts to breathe again. The weather starts warming up, it becomes more welcoming, more inviting, and life just feels more active. That's really the key word here with Aries. It is active. Now, of course, you can have the shadow side of Aries, which tends to signify impatience and impulsivity. Both Mars and the Sun represent a youthful enthusiasm. And oftentimes when we allow our enthusiasm to get the best of us, well, very serious decision-making kind of goes out the window. And of course, if we're looking at Mars, the god of war, there is a competitive edge to Aries. And the shadow side of that is taking it to the extreme, a violent side. Now, let's not forget, nothing in astrology is inherently good and inherently bad. There is a light and a dark to everything, and it is that juxtaposition that is the driving force behind the mandala of this beautiful celestial language. Now, let's not forget that between Mars and the Sun, there is a serious yearning for individuality in Aries. This is the sign that is very comfortable standing alone, doing things solo, and absorbing all of that spotlight. This can be egoistic, or this can simply be stepping into the hero or champion archetype. There's leadership here. Now, the type of leadership that it represents really depends on what else is going on in the chart and what other planets are communicating together as well. If you look across the zodiacal wheel to Libra on the other side of Aries, Libra being the cardinal air sign of the zodiac, that is actually where Saturn is exalted. He is raised on high in the sign of Libra. Here, it is very easy for him to flow and do his best work. So, when you put him on the opposite side of the chart in Aries, all of a sudden, that motivation, that ease starts to suffer. And so rather than being raised on high, now he has fallen. He is in his depression. So fall and depression are two terms that are interchangeable in the astrological language. What does this mean for Saturn to enter his fall? This is a slow-moving planet, so he can represent things slowing down, whether they are slowing down intentionally with mature decision-making, with seriousness, or because there are actual delays, restrictions, and limitations getting in the way of something. So he represents borders, boundaries, limitations, the glass ceiling that we might reach in society. He also can represent leadership. In mythology, he is Kronos. He is the father of Zeus. So fathers, leaders, but elderly leaders. Leaders that favor the old ways, the old way of doing things. I don't want to say boomer, but sometimes Saturn does give boomer vibes. Saturn also brings ancient wisdom to the table. He represents the passage of time and space itself. He represents liminal spaces and transitional spaces between one thing to another. He is the embodiment of oppositions and polarizations. Saturn forces you to look at both sides of a coin. Saturn pulls things apart so that you're forced to examine different aspects of the same thing that are often in conflict with one another. Saturn is often scary to some people because he's so closely associated with death, but there's still more to it than just death. Yes, he represents decay. Yes, he represents aging, but that's because death is quite literally a transition. It is that space between life and activity and then silence, quiet, unmoving. So the big signification here is Saturn can represent impermanence. The fact that everything eventually comes to an end, even time itself, every second that ticks by. So with this understanding of Saturn in mind and what I've just described about Aries, I think it's safe to say you can see why such a slow-moving, calculated type of planet wouldn't do very well in the sign of Aries. It struggles to express itself in a way that is authentic to itself. What can we expect or start to anticipate with Saturn's movement from Pisces into Aries? One concept that comes to mind straight away is a false start. Think about it. You have Aries, the sign that represents the new zodiacal year, spring, life returning to Earth after cold winter where Saturn is comfortable. And then you just have Saturn coming along that just loves to say, nah, no, not today, bruh, try again. So do not pass go, do not collect $200. So jot that down and really think, what projects do you have coming up, especially where Aries is situated in your chart? Consider those house significations. Do you have any projects coming up that you could maybe take some extra time to brainstorm alternate methods, any sort of backup plans? Get a plan B in place because you might need to utilize that plan B when Saturn finally makes his transit into Aries. Of course, with false starts, nobody loves a false start. Nobody loves a plan falling through. So we could see a lot of frustration here. Mars himself can represent frustration, represents anger and rage. And now we have Saturn, this big old mountainous brick wall, again, saying, no, not right now. So there's this desire to hit the gas pedal and really push the pedal to the metal, but you're kind of stuck. Think for a minute. Your car is stuck in mud, and the more you press the gas, the more the tires just spin out and spin out and spin out. And that whole situation just gets your blood pressure going. I think with this type of ingress, we're going to need to remember and be mindful of our frustration and take a minute to breathe, bring the blood pressure down, ground ourselves, and then think. Now, I mentioned Saturn can represent fathers and authority and leadership, but the interesting thing about Saturn is this is not a planet that represents the spotlight. Saturn does not really care to be working at the center of attention. Saturn is very comfortable doing his work on the outskirts. He can represent ostracization and alienation. You might see those significations when talking about the sign of Aquarius as an example, which is one of his domiciles. And so you have a sign, Aries, that loves individuality, that can do with soaking up some attention and being that forward-facing leader. This oppositional force of Saturn in Aries might force us into the spotlight when we're not ready, when we're least prepared for it, in fact. Saturn can represent things that are underground, that aren't truly seen, that are hidden in the shadows. Now you have Aries, which represents spring, right? Where the seeds have grown and now the shoots, the green shoots are sprouting and coming into visibility. So there's this idea of feeling very vulnerable and naked to a big public audience. So that's a discomfort we might want to steel ourselves for in preparation for his transit. On top of feeling exposed and vulnerable, think about the other types of things that might be exposed when we bring them up from the underground, from the muck and the mud and the grime. This could be a time where we see certain types of secrets coming to light. Because Saturn represents maturity, and you have the sun's spotlight illuminating these shadows and this murky underground that Saturn represents, we might end up needing to confront some of our own shadows, or the shadows of people around us, depending on where Aries is in your chart, that, again, we might not really be ready to face. But Saturn be damned, he's here to shove it in our face and say, you have to deal with this now. Back to the topic of youthfulness, which really comes from the sun. The sun is ego, the sun is youth, the sun is vivacity and vitality. The sun is just very excited about life. He is source. He is where life has originated from. And here we have Saturn, the old leader, the old gods. So both of these planets represent leadership. Both of these planets can represent the father and authority. But you have two very distinct archetypes happening here. The sun is quite literally the sun, the new generation of leadership and governance and ideas, whereas Saturn is stuck in the old ways. Saturn is all about ancient wisdom and past generations and knowledge accumulated over eons and millennia. So this is going to be an interesting polarization, specifically on the topic of governance and authority, where you might see a struggle to pass on the torch, so to speak. You see this a lot in mythological texts where the father, the old king, just does not want to relinquish the throne. He is not ready. He refuses. He wants things done his way, as he's always done it, as his father has always done it. And so he often ends up sending the heir to the throne, whether it's his son, son-in-law. The heir gets sent away on a grandiose adventure in an attempt to chase them away from overtaking the throne and bringing in a new way of thinking and a new regime. This is a common archetype in literature. This is a common archetype that we can see with Saturn moving into Aries. I bet you will see some competition, martial, and conflict happening with regards to passing the torch in authoritative and governing circles. Now that was just part one of this astrological equation. Now we have to take into consideration part two, which is our planet Neptune, who often represents vastness, like the deep, dark unknown of the ocean. Neptune is formless and nebulous. Neptune fluctuates, changes, is intangible and impermanent. Now you might notice some of these significations he shares with Saturn, so that's where this interesting mix comes in while they have their dialogue together in the sign of Aries. Neptune can also represent the overall concept of spirituality, of ascension, of something more. Again, somewhat similar to Saturn's pursuit, melancholic pursuit of something greater than. One of the first ideas that come to mind when I consider these two planets in the temple of Mars is Neptune's ability to dissolve or at least conceal, make things foggy and murky, and Saturn's desire to define boundaries. Really, draw a box around things, fit things into boxes. We might end up experiencing a lot of rage and frustration and anger over our inability to recognize that boundaries and limits are there. We literally have the fog of war of Neptune clouding our sight, and it's like, imagine trying to move around in a pitch black room and all you have is one tiny little candle. You really can't see that far ahead. And Saturn is all about the long term. Saturn thinks many years ahead, not just minutes. And so I can see a lot of people metaphorically stubbing their toes on the furniture as they're trying to navigate these projects and goals that they want to achieve. And that leads to frustration. It could even be hazardous to us. Because Neptune conceals those restrictions and limitations, we might also have an intangible, heavy feeling of being held back from something. We don't know what it necessarily is. We can't put a face or a name or a label to it. Again, it kind of ties into Saturn's melancholy. We just feel like we're meant to do something and the universe itself is just working against us. And that is frustrating because that's something beyond our control, which Neptune can represent a lack of control. Neptune has no form. It has no definition. It has no label. You can't grip it, hang on to it. And so that can be a real struggle for some people. Now, if we look at the concept of spirituality with Neptune, we have Saturn, planet that represents the old ways, the old governance. So there's a concept of murkiness around authority. And you could probably take this in one of two ways. The first way is a humbling of people's God complexes, a knocking down a few pegs of some hot-headed, egoistic authority figures. If we look at it metaphorically, we have Neptune creating this fog where we can't see where we're putting our feet. And, you might end up just stepping right off a cliff and descending from this high exalted point you originally thought you held. So we might end up seeing demotions, both literally and metaphorically. Now, on the other side, we might end up seeing an over-exaggeration of the God complex. We might end up seeing that martyr archetype coming back to haunt us. Oftentimes, we see martyrdom with Mars and Neptune aspects, like direct aspects, but you have Neptune in the Temple of Aries. So Neptune is just being served up a big old plate of rage and competition and aggressiveness and me, individuality. Gotta go, gotta go, gotta go. So what else can Saturn and Neptune do but push hard towards further ascension, and kind of blot out the opinions and perspective of others? There's a single-mindedness that could be constructive, of course. Mars is action. We cannot accomplish things without action, but we run the risk of it being a detriment because we have Saturn here in a place where he's unable to focus at his best. Now, remember what I said about the old and the new. The old ways aren't necessarily negative. The new ways are not necessarily negative. It's really what you do with these things. So encountering dichotomies of old and new is probably going to be a very common theme echoed across different parts of our lives, especially if you take a look at your own chart and see where Aries is situated. Those house significations could see you struggling to take in aspects of the old and aspects of the new. The way I think of this is both Neptune and Saturn are experiencing a cyclical reset. Because Aries signifies the start of the zodiacal year, I'm seeing this as the karma that Saturn and Neptune have reflected on our lives coming to a close and then restarting a new karmic cycle. Now, we can actually take a look back into the past very recently to get a taste for what those karmic cycles were like. If you want to grab your diary, your journal, your planner, your calendar, your photo album, whatever you use to keep track of your memories, and flip all the way back to about May 25th, 2025. Take a look at what was happening there. What was the climate of your life like, especially the significations of the house that Aries is sitting in? Because on May 25th of last year, that's when Saturn first dipped his toes into the fiery pits of Aries. And so we actually got a glimpse at what the next 2.5, 3 years is going to look like with Saturn transiting through this sign. From May 25th to about July 12th, Saturn just almost made it to the 2nd degree of Aries before stationing retrograde and dipping right back out. And on September 1st of last year is when he came back into Pisces for one final swan song of this particular sign. This is what I love about astrology. Because astrology depends so heavily on life experience and the context of what's already happened, it really makes that old saying, hindsight is 2020, feel that much more real. So you better believe I'll be going back through my old journals and seeing what was going on around the end of May, beginning of June for me, and how I can anticipate what those themes will be coming up for the next 2.5 years. And there you have it. Those are just some of my very, very brief delineations of Saturn and Neptune coming together in the sign of Aries. I hope you gleaned some wisdom and insight from this video, and I hope you feel more at ease and more prepared for what's to come. We got this, folks. Now, if you've ever been curious about your own birth chart and what the planets have to say about you and your life experience, then I invite you to join me over on Instagram. The link to my profile is down in the description below, where you can book a one-on-one personalized reading with yours truly. I offer astrology readings and I offer tarot card readings. I would love to have a one-on-one dialogue with you and help you delineate what the planets are saying about your life and what is in store for you moving forward. On a final note, if this video has piqued your interest in astrology and the mystical, by all means I invite you to check out my other videos on the topic. I've been discussing some of the biggest transits of 2026 so far, and I'm looking forward to having more astrology chit-chats with you in the near future. Don't forget to take care of yourselves and each other. See you in the next video. Bye-bye!